Yati,
family members, Ari, enemies, Madhyastha, neutrals, Mitra, well-wishers, Udasina, indifferent, Vidvisha, or envious persons, Sarve, all, Eva, indeed, he, certainly, Sarvesham, all, Bhavanti, become, Kramashaha, gradually, Mitaha, of one another. Translation: in this material world, which advances like a river that carries away the living entity, all people become friends, relatives, and enemies in due course of time. They also act neutrally, they mediate, they despise one another, and they act in many other relationships. Nonetheless, despite these various transactions, no one is permanently related. Purport: it is our practical experience in this material world that the same person who is one's friend today becomes one's enemy tomorrow. Our relationships as friends or enemies, family men or outsiders, are actually the results of our different dealings. Chitraketu Maharaj was lamenting for his son who was now dead, but he could have considered the situation otherwise. This living entity, he could have thought, was my enemy in my past life, and now, having appeared as my son, he is prematurely leaving just to give me pain and agony. Why should he not consider his dead son his former enemy, and instead of lamenting be jubilant because of an enemy's death? As stated in Bhagavad Gita 3.27, Prakriti Kriyamana Ni Gunai Kamani Sarvasha. Factually, everything is happening because of our association with the modes of material nature. Therefore, one who is my friend today in association with the mode of goodness may be my enemy tomorrow in association with the modes of passion and ignorance. As the modes of material nature work, in illusion we accept others as friends, enemies, sons or fathers in terms of the reactions of different dealings under different conditions. Bando kya charimatya shta mitru dasina vidvishaha sarva eva hi sarvesham bhavanti kramasho mitaha. In this material world, which advances like a river that carries away the living entity, all people become friends, relatives, and enemies in due course of time. They also act neutrally, they mediate, they despise one another, and they act in many other relationships. Nonetheless, despite these various transactions, no one is permanently related. Om Ajnanasmiranda Shakyanandana Srakya Chakshmitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Ukham Karoti Vacharam Hangam Langaiti Girim Yat Kripa Taraham Vande Sri Gurum Dinatarinam Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Gurave Srimat Bhaktivedanta Swami Namaste Saraswati Devam Gauravani Prachayani Vishesha Shunyavadi Paskachari Sataini
Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sandhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram, Ram Hare Hare.
So this is a very interesting verse and purport. Here we actually get revealed in Prabhupada's purport that Maharaj Chitraketu's son, he thought him his very, very dear son, the most, my beloved, the greatest treasure I have. Actually, it was a former enemy. It was a former enemy who had taken his birth as his son, and then just to give him the ultimate stab of pain by dying very early. If if you have an enemy, can you imagine a more, insidious way of really getting at your enemy than becoming a son and then dying? You couldn't, because that's, generally, we have enemies and we want to cause them pain. So what a brilliant way to cause someone pain, by taking birth and dying. But that seems to be, of course, here in this purport, probably he is right that Maharaj Chittiketu could have considered like that. He doesn't say it is like that. Actually, next purport probably actually says it says here it has already been explained that Chittiketu's son was his enemy in a past life and had now appeared as his son just to give him more severe pain. So that's the next purport probably explained. Actually, he was his enemy. He was a former enemy. That would be an interesting thing next time. You're consoling someone who just lost a dear child. It happens also all the time. The child dies. I met one mother yesterday who was must be today. She was going to celebrate her little daughter's 2 years birthday, and the daughter died a few years. Had already died, but she was still celebrating her birthday. And of course, I hadn't read this prepared. I should have told her yesterday that actually it was your enemy who would pay me. Maybe that doesn't work.
Maybe it does.
You can try. Of course, it's extremely sensitive. We can joke here, but when if actually you're with someone who actually lost a child like that, then of course one has to be extremely sensitive, and it's probably not the right time for jokes. But it's the right time for transcendental vision. Not only is not joking with Maharaj Chittiketu, he's giving transcendental vision. But it's of course a very, very heavy situation when parents they lose a child. If you want to develop compassion, I saw that given as an advice. It was, I don't remember the context, was it some devotee wrote or someone just picked it up from somewhere where you had some wise, some wisdom that, it was if you want to develop this, then you should do that. And I don't remember, but I remember this, that if you want to develop compassion, then you should go to a funeral of a child that died, and just feel the pain of the parents. Then you feel real compassion. It's so heavy. It's so heavy to lose a child like that. I know my grandmother. My grandfather died, and then my grandmother, she was left alone, and I was at the funeral there, and she wasn't too affected. It was heavy, but she wasn't too affected. I think once she would have been looking a little forward to, because I don't know. But then 2 or 3 years later, her only daughter died. My aunt, she died. At that time, I saw my grandmother, she completely broke down. She was in that 80 something. And she was a very sober woman, I never saw her like that. At that time, she completely broke down, crying. So it's so heavy to lose a child like that. So anyhow, that's kind of a side thing. Except we have to understand that actually there's so much suffering in this world. But then if we get some transcendental vision, we actually start seeing things from a transcendental perspective, we understand that actually, we simply caught in this flowing river of samsara. Samsara is a flowing river. It's a river of time that is bringing us from one body to another body to another body. And we appear in different relationships to each other, like actors on a stage. So we in this drama, I am the father, and you are my sons, and we are friends in this drama. Then there's the month from now, there's another drama, we act it. But there's something, we are enemies, acting as enemies. People it's just, see that from the transcendent perspective, we're just acting. Of course, in the material world, although we take it extremely seriously, we identify completely with the roles we are in this right now, and think this is us, this is the problem, this is the false ego that makes us identify completely with the body and the body situation and the environment we're in, and think this is, I am like this, and therefore it becomes very intense, very severe. For example, when enemies, conditioned souls can be so hateful of each other, they will do anything to cause the other pain, even though they might kill themselves. For example, what benefit does this former enemy of Chitaketo's, how does he benefit? He had to die to cause pain to Chitaketo. So it's not that he himself, he was not, how did he find pleasure in that? He had to suffer even more. He had to eat poison and die. It's not very nice to eat poison. It's actually very painful, and you die from it. And but that's especially in the mode of ignorance. That's mode of ignorance that one revenge. I have to get back at someone at any cost. I just have to see you. I have to see you suffer. And even though it actually causes me, it causes my own suffering, that's a mode of ignorance. One performs actions that are neither good for himself nor for others. So that's when one falls down there. Then it could be, this enmity becomes extremely, vicious, and of course, no intelligence is lost. We see that. Enemies, they become so, it can be between individuals, they hate each other so much that they will kill each other and kill themselves in the process, or do anything to cause the other person pain. That is the material world, and especially it's the material world in the Kali Yuga in which we live in. Kali Yuga is characterized, it's the age of quarrel. And Prabhupada, he writes in the purport in first canto, is it 5th chapter? I don't remember the verse number. It's is it the verse about Kali Yuga? It's 1:10. Where he writes Kalo asmin yuge jana manda samanda matayo manda bhagyo prakruta. What is the first line in that verse? Famous verse, Pandits. Prayenal payusha sabya kalo asmin yuge jana manda samanda matayo manda bhagyo prakruta. That, learned one, men in this iron age of Kali live but short lives. They are lazy, quarrelsome, misguided, unfortunate, and above all, always disturbed. That's Sutta Goswami describing the age of Kali that we're living in. So it's the age of quarrel. And probably there he writes in the purport that in the age of Kali, great trifle, even over trifles, you understand the word trifle? Bagatelle. It sounds like something you can eat. Den man spiser. Det er ikke noget, jeg har prøvet. Det kan godt lide som en eller anden fransk bagatelle.
Der er en brød, eller det er så let, så det kan man kalde det bagatelle, fordi det er så let at spille. Så luftigt.
Okay. Ja. Jamen så er det noget. So even over trifles, even wars can break out. Probably gives, that's not that purport, so maybe it's another purport, is tak bak visaga janatan vipla overs. But then it talks about, I think it was 1960, a war broke out between China and India, and they were fighting over some lands in the Himalayas. And probably there writes about that actually it's, formerly in previous ages, for centuries, China and India, they were living as neighbors, they were living peacefully. And because at that time they were all God-fearing, they were religious, they were fearing God, they were in the mode of goodness. So they were living very peacefully. But then after, with the advancement of the age of Kali, the modes of passion and ignorance increases to the point that argument starts over, and he writes about that, he writes that there's no reason to quarrel over a piece of land which has no value. It's a complete, just a desert in the mountains, or ice desert. Nobody could live there. Nothing could grow there. There's no reason to quarrel over such a piece of land. What to speak of engaging in a war. But so the point is as an example that actually it's not the issues themselves which are the causes of the wars and the quarrels in this Kali Yuga. It's simply due to the polluted atmosphere in this age. Therefore, their quarrels even arises over, trifles, over nothing. But it's the nature of of age of Kali, and it's because of the influence of ignorance and passion. Therefore, quarrels, they arise over nothing. And that's also the explanation. We see that someone can be, who are functioning in the mode of goodness, and they're friends. But then modes of nature, they changes, and they become influenced by passion and ignorance. And then former friends become enemies, deadly enemies. So that's, so that you might wonder why that they were friends, now they're enemies. That's because of the influence on the modes. Because we condition souls, actually the modes themselves do not affect us. It's because of the false ego, and that we're completely identifying with the modes of nature. Actually, just as a side remark, this Prakriti Kriyamana Ni Guna Ekami Sarvasya Ahankara Vimudhatma Kartaham Iti Manyate. So the translation actually, the old translation was wrong, and there it said that conditioned soul, due to the influence of the modes of nature, thinks himself do activities which are actually performed by nature. But that's a wrong translation. It's a conditioned soul, due to the influence of false ego, considers himself to be the doer of activities which are actually performed by the modes of material nature. That's because there's that word ahankara, which is in the Sanskrit. So actually the modes of nature themselves do not affect us. But it's when we have the false ego involved with nature, then we are affected. And then the example I've heard given is that you are, we can go to a prison, and actually the prison doesn't affect us. We can go in and out of the prison. On some occasions had lectures in prisons, so I go, into the prison, and I could walk out of the prison. Of course, there was some check at the gate and security, but I was not affected by the prison as such. But those who were breaking the law, they were affected by the prison. They were escorted. They were behind locked door. They were escorted by a prison guard. They could take part in the lecture, and when it was over, then the prison guard took them back and then locked them behind the doors because they broke the law. So as long as we do not break the law, as long as we do not rebel against Krishna, as long as we don't want to compete with Krishna, this is what false ego means. I want to be God. So as long as we do not have that desire, and then modes of nature do not affect us. We can, we see here Nada Muni and Gira Muni are in the material world. They also observe the modes of nature like that, but nothing affects them. But conditioned souls who are influenced by false ego, then they're caught by the modes of nature. That's how material nature functions. So when the modes they change, then suddenly former friends become deadly enemies. It can even happen amongst devotees. It can happen amongst guru and disciples. Of course, gurus don't become. If it actually liberated soul, don't become an enemy of a disciple, but disciples can become enemies of gurus. There are so many examples of that, but there's one example of in South India of Ramanujacharya, the great Acharya, Sri Sampradaya, had a disciple named Kuresh. He has a number of very famous disciples, and Kuresh in one sense might be, I don't know if he was the most famous, but he was very, very famous. And Kuresh, he had a disciple who was extremely intelligent and a brilliant disciple, but at one point just turned against him and actually became an enemy of him. And he just wanted somehow or other, I'm not exactly clear about what it was, but again, it wasn't particular. He got influenced by the modes of nature, and he became a deadly enemy of Kuresh and Ramanujacharya. So much so that he conspired to have Ramanujacharya killed. But Kuresh, he thwarted that by actually this disciple he conspired with a king who was a great hater of Vaishnavas. He was a great Shaivite, and he was like a religious fanatic. He wanted Shiva is the only way, and practically like Muslims, either you accept Shiva or you die. It was like that. And he was disturbed about actually this disciple of Kuresh said actually that you have to, if you want to fight against Vaishnavism, you have to get rid of the Ramanujacharya. He's so powerful, he's such a powerful preacher, he's converting so many to Vaishnavism. So then they decided to invite Ramanujacharya to a debate with the Pandits, with the king's Pandits. And if the Pandit could conquer Ramanujacharya, then of course, then the thing it was settled, and Shiva would be accepted as the greatest. But if Ramanujacharya would win the debate, they decided then he would be killed. Like that. And so this invitation came on the way, and Ramanujacharya agreed, I'll go. But Kuresh said, don't go, it's a conspiracy, I don't want you to go there. And Ramanujacharya said, yes, I will go there, but why shouldn't I? But then Kuresh said, no, I don't want to let you go there. Sometimes that's between some disciples, to protect their guru, I will love the guru, they'll even oppose him. And actually Kuresh, he convinced Ramanuja, don't go, we'll do something else, I'll go instead of you. So Kuresh, he dressed like Ramanujacharya as a sannyasi in saffron, and Ramanujacharya, he put on the grihastha clothes on Kuresh, and they like that. And then Ramanujacharya, for a while, he went underground. And Kuresh, he went as in the guise of Ramanujacharya. It was not, in those days, there were no photographs, so it wasn't that the king as such, he knew what Ramanujacharya looked like. And but in that, Kuresh had this debate with a court pandit, and he defeated him easily. And the king got so angry that he said, kill this Ramanujacharya. Of course, I mean, it's an entangled story. Ramanujacharya had many years earlier saved the king's daughter from being haunted by a ghost. And the princess there, she actually, then when she heard that the father wanted to kill Ramanujacharya, she came up and objected, you cannot do that. He has saved your daughter's life, you cannot kill him. And then they decided to instead to pluck out his eyes, or burn his eyes. So actually they did that to Quresh. He had his eyes burned out, he became blind. And it's of course an interesting story how Quresh was the way that he was reacting. Did he become angry at any point, or curse the king, or curse his disciple, or like that? No, actually he was. Quresh. That's one of the why Quresh is celebrated as such a great devotee. He was actually ecstatic all the time. He was thinking, what an opportunity to sacrifice my eyes for the sake of my guru. When, how often does one get a chance to do that? Wow! And then he was actually Quresh didn't go alone. He had was it Gosti Purna? Someone knows the story. It was Gosti Purna who was actually the guru of Ramanujacharya. Yeah, they were both there, and they both had their eyes burned out. And Gosti, he actually, like Gosti Purna, I think it was Gosti Purna. He actually died. He was an old man. And he died. Quresh survived this and was walking around like a blind man, just completely rejected, walking around blind for a while, until he finally, Ramanujacharya started searching for him, and again he came back to Ramanujacharya blind. Then, of course, as a whole, the story continues there. Ramanujacharya, he's so pained to see how Quresh was treated. But Quresh is happy that I was able to sacrifice my eyes like that. And Ramanujacharya said, you should go to Ranganath and pray to him to get your eyes back. Ask him for a special blessing to get your eyes back. So Quresh, he objects, he doesn't want to ask anything for himself, and Ramanujacharya says, you must go. And then Quresh is actually described, he goes there 3 times. First time he doesn't ask for his eyes the first time. What does he ask for instead?
Is it that to bring back his guru's property?
He ends up asking for that. But the first time he simply asked, may this, because this king who had poked out his eyes, after some time he got the reaction for this offense to a Vaishnava. He died a very miserable death. He actually got some kind of cancer. He got some lump growing out of his neck that at one point became as big as his own head, and he died from that. So some kind of cancer he got and died. So he had died at that time, and Quresh at that time he asked, may this king, I don't remember his name, may he be liberated and be sent back to Vaikuntha. And Rangana said, I don't want to do that. Quresh said, please. He said, okay. Back to Vaikuntha. And the second time he asked for the same for his disciple. Or maybe he asked first for the disciple and the second time for the king. I don't remember. He asked for this envious disciple, have him liberated, bring him back to Vaikuntha.